Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Winter's teeth had sunk deep into the valley, and the sky churned with a violence that locals called a whiteout. Wind screamed across the high ridges, bending ancient pines and lashing the ranger cabins with icy needles. You could taste the static in the air, an electric warning, as if something was about to happen that nobody could prepare for. Clara Evans gripped the wheel of her battered Park Service truck, headlights struggling to cut through the swirling snow. She'd seen storms like this before, but tonight, the world outside seemed almost unreal. Ghostly shapes twisting in the wind, drifts swallowing the road, the radio hissing with static and distant voices. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the dial. She told herself it was just the cold, but she knew better. The tremor in her fingers was memory. Old, sharp, refusing to fade. Years ago, on a night much like this, she'd ridden into a storm on horseback and hadn't walked away the same. The crack of bone, the shriek of her mare, the world spinning and going black. These were ghosts she could never shake. And yet, she was still out here. Still searching, still running, still refusing to quit. A burst of static split the silence. Clara pressed the radio button, voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "This is Ranger Evans. North perimeter, visibility's near zero. Roads are impassable at mile 12. Repeat, impassable. Requesting backup for animal distress. Repeat, possible animal distress in the blizzard." She waited for the dispatcher, but only the storm answered, the wind howling like something alive. Then, piercing through it all, a sound that didn't belong. A desperate, shivering whinny carried on the gale. It wasn't the echo of wild mustangs that sometimes roam the edge of the park. This was different. Sharper, full of fear and pleading. Instinct told her to turn back. Protocol screamed the same. But something inside her, deeper than training or caution, pushed her forward. She grabbed the radio again, thumb tight on the button. "Jonas? You copy? I need you out here. I heard something. It's not wild." Static, then a voice, quiet and gravelly. "Copy, Evans. Sending coordinates. On my way." Jonas Malik had always moved like a shadow. Quiet, reserved, never wasting a word. He'd come to Wyoming after 2 tours overseas, and while he'd never talked about what happened, Clara had seen the scars he tried to hide. She'd seen the way he froze when a helicopter flew too low, or how his eyes searched the darkness when the wind picked up. Tonight, she was glad to have him watching her back. Clara parked, left the engine running, and stepped out into the blizzard. Snow hammered her face, stinging her cheeks raw, biting through her parka in seconds. She pulled her scarf higher, boots crunching in the knee-deep drift. The air felt thick, pressing in from all sides. Every breath burned. There again. The whinny, closer now, wild with panic. She stumbled forward, the world shrinking to a tunnel of swirling white, heart pounding. Was she chasing a phantom? She'd seen people lose themselves in storms like this, following echoes into nowhere. But she kept moving. Behind her, Jonas appeared like a ghost from the snow, his lantern beam flickering. "You hear it?" he asked, eyes wide, breath coming in clouds. She nodded, pointing ahead. "That way. It's close." The two of them pressed on, the world reduced to footsteps and gasps in the relentless scream of the wind. Clara's mind spun with flashes of the past, the fall, the pain, the helplessness. She tried to push it away, but it clawed at her with every step. Her hands shook as she gripped the radio, thumb numb against the cold plastic. She pressed on. Suddenly, Jonas froze, holding up a gloved fist. "Wait," he whispered, voice low. "Listen." Through the howling wind, there it was. A cry, deeper this time, almost human in its desperation. Jonas's jaw clenched. For a moment his eyes were somewhere else. Desert wind, sirens, dust, and blood. Then he was back, pushing forward with new urgency. The snow pressed in, thicker, the world whispering with secrets. Shapes moved just out of sight. Branches, shadows, maybe worse. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, every sense screaming that something wasn't right. But she wouldn't stop. Suddenly, the ground dropped away. Jonas caught her arm, steadying her as they skidded down a short slope, landing in a shallow, wind-blown hollow. For a moment, everything was silent except for the whimper of the wind. Then they saw it. Half buried in the snow was a massive black horse, sides heaving, flanks coated in ice. His head was low, eyes rolling in pain and exhaustion. Pressed tight against him, a smaller shape, a foal, trembling violently, struggling to stay upright. The stallion curved his body protectively, using what strength he had left to shield the foal from the worst of the storm. Clara's breath caught. She'd seen wild horses before, but this stallion was different. His coat gleamed even under the frost, muscles corded with strength that hadn't yet failed him. But it was the look in his eyes, a spark of intelligence, pleading, fierce, that sent a chill down her spine. Jonas knelt, hands out, voice soothing. "Easy, big guy. We're here to help." The foal let out a plaintive cry, stumbling against Clara's leg. She dropped to her knees, wrapping her coat around the shivering body, feeling the frantic heartbeat against her palm. "Shh. You're safe now. I've got you. I promise." Jonas worked quickly, fashioning a makeshift harness from rope and canvas, his movements quick but gentle. "We need to move," he said. "They won't last out here." As he worked, Clara's gaze fell on the stallion's flank, and she froze. Beneath the ice, burned deep into the skin, was a mark. Not a ranch brand, not wild. Something official, military. Letters she couldn't quite make out. A chill raced down her spine. Jonas saw it too, eyes narrowing. "That's not just any horse," he said quietly. "I've seen marks like that before. This horse, he's owned by someone." Clara swallowed hard, adrenaline mixing with fear and awe. "Not anymore," she whispered. "Tonight, he's ours." The wind shrieked louder, as if the blizzard itself was trying to bury the truth. But Clara and Jonas moved together, lifting, hauling, fighting for every step. The storm pressed in, alive with secrets, as if something out there watched, waiting, whispering, promising that this rescue was only the beginning. And above it all, the stallion's eyes burned with a question. Was this a rescue? Or a reckoning? The world shrank to the hollow where Clara and Jonas crouched in the raging white storm, fighting for breath and clarity. The cold gnawed at Clara's fingers as she kept the foal wrapped in her parka, pulling him close, feeling every shiver rack his small body. He was little more than skin and bone beneath the damp fuzz of his winter coat, ribs trembling with every desperate breath. For a moment, all she heard was his rapid, shallow breathing and the haunting hush of snow falling, relentless, all around. The black stallion, already an apparition, larger than life, battered but unbroken, struggled to lift his head as Jonas approached. The animal's flanks heaved, muscles twitching with exhaustion and pain. But still, he forced his battered body between Jonas and the foal. His ears were flat, eyes wild, nostrils flaring white in the darkness. Clara's voice was soft, steadying. "It's okay, big guy. We're not here to hurt you. You did good, real good." Jonas, moving slowly, crouched at the stallion's shoulder. "Come on, old warrior. Let us help you." He slid a canvas tarp under the stallion's chest, improvising a harness. The stallion grunted but did not bite, eyes tracking every movement. Jonas paused for a heartbeat, catching the flash of the burned brand. Military. Unmistakable, even under the frost. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing yet. The foal pressed his nose into Clara's gloved hand, cold breath puffing against her palm. She stroked the tiny head, murmuring, "Hey there, little one. Hang in there. You're safe." But inside, she wondered how close they all were to disaster. She'd seen horses lost to storms before. Sometimes the cold was faster than even the strongest will. The wind howled, shaking the trees overhead. Jonas looked at her, voice urgent. "If we wait any longer, we'll lose them both." He checked the knots one last time, then slung the rope over his shoulder. "Can you walk?" Clara nodded. "I've got the foal. Let's move." She stood, hoisting the foal as best she could, arms burning with the effort. The little horse whimpered but did not resist. Jonas grunted as he hauled the stallion upright, guiding him step by faltering step, the animal's legs splaying with each attempt to stand. For what felt like hours, They struggled up the incline, leaning into the shrieking wind, Jonas coaxing the stallion forward, Clara stumbling as she carried the foal. Snow swirled in frantic waves, erasing the world behind them, making every footstep feel like it was over a bottomless cliff. Clara's breath froze on her lips. Her feet went numb. Every few steps, Jonas would murmur something, a prayer, a promise, encouragement for the stallion, or maybe for himself. The storm pressed close, but in the growing darkness, the flickering lantern Jonas carried became their anchor, a little island of hope. Halfway up the slope, the stallion buckled, dropping to one knee. Jonas bent, shoulder braced against the animal's side, whispering urgently, "Come on, Omen. Don't quit now." Clara caught the name as if it was a word of power, a spell against despair. The foal whimpered, nuzzling at her side, desperate for warmth. Clara pressed him closer, blinking back stinging tears. For a moment, she flashed back to that old memory. The night she'd fallen, lying broken in the snow, while her mare fought to reach her. The pain, the fear, the overwhelming guilt. She shook her head, pushing forward. This was her second chance. She wouldn't waste it. Jonas managed to coax the stallion, Omen, back to his feet. He glanced at Clara, snow sticking to his beard and lashes. Old boy's still got some fight left. There was something else in his eyes. Recognition, maybe even awe. Clara wondered if he saw a piece of himself in this battered survivor. They crested the ridge, stumbling toward the dim shape of an abandoned ranger cabin. The roof sagged under the weight of snow, but the walls still stood, barely. Jonas shouldered the door open, letting the blizzard howl through for a second before slamming it shut again. Inside, the darkness was thick, heavy with old wood and memories. Clara set the foal down by the hearth, kneeling to rub warmth back into his tiny legs. The foal shuddered, blinking huge dark eyes at her, then nudged her hand again. She found herself whispering to him, stories, promises, whatever she could think of to keep hope alive. Jonas got the stallion inside with great effort, guiding Omen to the driest corner. He worked off the makeshift harness and began massaging the horse's legs, feeling for signs of frostbite, injury, anything that might spell disaster. Clara found a half-empty can of fuel by the old stove and managed to coax a flicker of flame to life. The warmth was thin, barely holding back the night, but it was something. As the wind rattled the windows, Clara checked the foal's breathing, relief flooding her when his breaths came slower, deeper. Jonas moved in silence, lost in thought. Then, as he brushed snow from Omen's side, he saw it again. The brand, burned deep into the skin. He ran his gloved finger across the edges, tracing the letters EQX. Not just a brand, a mark of ownership, of something darker. Clara caught the look on his face. "What is it?" she asked, voice low. Jonas shook his head, but his eyes were troubled. "That's a military brand. Project Equinox. Saw a few like it when I was in the service. Special animals, trained, bred for endurance, rescue, other things. Most of those projects were shut down years ago." He looked at the stallion, respect mingled with sadness. He wasn't just abandoned. Someone tried to erase him. Clara digested this in silence, stroking the foal's head as she stared into the fire. The pieces didn't fit. If Omen was a product of some secret project, what was he doing out here in the middle of nowhere, with a half-frozen foal clinging to him? And whose desperate whinny had called her through the storm? Was it the foal? The stallion? Or something else? The foal shifted, nuzzling at Clara's coat. She smiled, then caught Jonas's gaze. "We need to give them names. You already called him Omen." Jonas nodded, a hint of a smile tugging at his mouth. "Seem right. He's a warning. And a promise. As for the little one," the foal looked up, eyes shining with a stubborn light. Clara thought for a moment, then said, "Solace. After all this, he's hope, isn't he?" Jonas nodded again. Solace, then. In the flickering firelight, as the blizzard raged outside, the four of them huddled together, 2 battered humans and 2 horses clinging to survival. Clara fed the foal sips of warm milk from a battered thermos, feeling the tension begin to lift from his small body. Jonas sat close by, cleaning Omen's wounds with gentle hands. They did not speak much more. The night was full of questions, but for now, survival was enough. Clara felt the old guilt ease, just a little, as the foal breathed warm and steady against her lap. In the darkness, Omen watched her, eyes bright with something that felt almost like gratitude. And in the heart of the storm, for the first time in years, Clara let herself believe in second chances. The blizzard battered the tiny ranger station like a living thing, shaking window panes and moaning through the chinks in the old log walls. Inside, Clara Evans paced a rut in the warped floorboards, glancing anxiously from the shivering foal, Solace, curled by the fire, to the massive black stallion, Omen, collapsed in the far corner. The room smelled of wet fur, singed wood, and something sharp, fear. Jonas moved steadily, pulling the last of the old wool blankets from the storage chest and draping it over Omen's heaving sides. "He's colder than I like," Jonas muttered, voice nearly lost beneath the wind. "If we can't warm him up soon, we'll lose him." Clara knelt beside Solace, feeding him warmed milk, coaxing the foal's trembling lips around the bottle's nipple. Solace sucked desperately, but his body was still racked with spasms, and Clara's gloved hand shook each time she touched him. She didn't dare remove her coat, not in this chill, so she bundled Solace in it with her own trembling arms, letting her own body heat bleed into the little horse. Each time his tiny nose nudged her hand, something old and raw in Clara began to heal, just a fraction. The radio lay silent on the desk, nothing but static and the occasional ghost of a distant frequency. Jonas had tried 3 times to call out, first for backup, then for a vet, then just to let headquarters know they were alive. But there was no answer. The storm had swallowed the signal, isolating them as completely as if they'd been stranded on the moon. Suddenly, a violent pounding rattled the cabin door. Jonas jerked to his feet, hand automatically going to his belt knife, while Clara braced herself between Solace and the door, heart in her throat. Another bang, then a voice, muffled but unmistakable, shouting above the wind, "It's Dr. Grant, let me in, before I freeze out here." Clara rushed to the door, flung it open just wide enough for a woman to slip inside. A woman, bundled in a heavy oilskin coat, snow-caked in her curly hair, glasses fogged up with sudden warmth. She stamped snow off her boots and dumped a battered medical bag by the fire. "Dr. Miriam Grant," she introduced herself with a quick, businesslike nod. Her breath came in puffs. "I got your garbled call. Something about a horse in distress. Barely made it up the ridge before the pass closed behind me." She sized up the room in an instant. The wounded stallion, the half-frozen foal, the desperate faces. She dropped to her knees beside Omen, running practiced hands over his legs and chest. When she reached for his halter, her fingers paused at a small, cold lump of steel. She squinted, wiping ice from the tag sewn into the leather. Stamped, almost as an afterthought, were the words, "Do not separate." Miriam's hand trembled, just a little. She'd seen tags like this before, in military programs, in places most people never heard of. Her eyes flicked to Jonas and Clara. "Where did you find them?" "In a drift. Half buried," Jonas said, voice tight. "The stallion kept the foal alive. Used his own body as a shield." "Did you see this?" Miriam asked, pointing at the tag. Clara shook her head. "It was under the snow," she replied. The weight of the words settled over the 3 adults. Do not separate. This was no ordinary tag, no ordinary rescue. Clara swallowed, feeling the chill seep into her bones. Miriam dug out a stethoscope, listening to Omen's labored breaths. She drew a syringe and injected a painkiller into his neck, murmuring, "Easy, old boy. You're safe now." The stallion twitched, but didn't fight. He was almost spent, sweat mixing with the melting snow on his coat. Miriam checked his gums, then started to clean and dress a nasty gash on his shoulder. He's been running hard, for days by the look of it. There's frostbite on his hocks. And is that... She brushed at the stallion's flank, revealing the burned brand. "Equinox," she whispered. Jonas nodded grimly. "You know the project?" Miriam's lips tightened. I did some work for them years ago. It was supposed to be about endurance, rescue, survival, but they pushed too hard, made things secretive, proprietary. She shook her head, turning to the foal. This one is new. Never saw him in the files. Her voice dropped. He was born after the escape. Clara looked up. Escape? Not abandonment. Miriam nodded. This wasn't a dumping. They got out. Clara absorbed that, heart pounding. So someone is going to come looking for them? Almost certainly, Miriam said, voice low. She stroked Solace's head, then moved to start a small IV drip, hydrating the foal with practiced care. But we'll keep them together. The tag says not to separate. If that's what they want, there must be a reason. Jonas glanced at Omen, whose eyelids fluttered as he struggled to stay awake. What about his injuries? Treatable, if we keep him warm and hydrated, Miriam said, voice brisk but uncertain. The foal is a fighter. If he makes it through the night, he has a real chance. Clara smiled a little, feeding Solace another trickle of warm milk over the fire. Solace nuzzled her, breath finally slowing, eyes drifting shut. He's tougher than he looks, Clara whispered. Outside, the storm showed no sign of letting up. Snow piled high against the door, rattling the window panes. The power flickered, then died entirely, leaving the cabin in shadows and firelight. Jonas rummaged through cupboards for more wood, piling logs beside the stove. For a while, the only sounds were the crackle of fire, the foal's breathing, and the occasional low groan from Omen. Miriam scribbled notes in a battered pad, recording every detail. Heart rate, temperature, injuries. I'll be starting a report, she muttered, half to herself, if only for my own conscience. Clara wrapped her arms around Solace and stared into the flames. In this flickering circle of warmth, a new alliance had formed. 3 humans, 2 horses, all battered, all survivors. She felt the bonds between them tightening with every passing moment. It was more than survival now. It was trust, the beginnings of family. Jonas settled beside Omen, hands steady on the stallion's neck. You're safe, he murmured. We'll keep you together. As dawn approached, the storm still raging outside, Clara realized she was no longer alone with her ghosts. Solace stirred beside her, letting out a soft sigh. Jonas dozed near Omen, Miriam's quiet scribbling the only other sign of life. For the first time in years, Clara felt a fragile hope begin to grow inside her, a hope as delicate and fierce as the foal in her arms. And outside, somewhere in the blinding snow, secrets waited to be unearthed. The world outside the ranger station was buried under an ocean of snow. When Clara awoke to the gray, anemic light of morning, the storm still raged, wind shrieking through the pines and hurling snow in wild eddies past the frosted windows. The cabin felt both like a fortress and a prison. Every sound was muffled by the relentless white. Every breath was touched by the scent of old wood smoke and horse sweat. Clara checked on Solace first. The foal was curled tight against her discarded parka, his breathing finally steady, sides moving in a slow, regular rhythm. Omen was awake but unmoving, head raised, ears flicking back and forth, as if he sensed threats only he could see. Jonas slept in a chair near the door, boots still on, knife within reach. Dr. Miriam Grant was hunched by the stove, coaxing a few embers to life for tea and warmth. The radio remained dead, static, then silence. Jonas had tried again and again, but there was no signal. It was as if the storm itself had swallowed every voice except theirs. Clara pressed her hand to the frosted glass, peering out. The world was all white, trees bent under impossible loads, drifts swallowing fence posts, the road erased entirely. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. Jonas blinked, coming awake, rubbing a hand over his eyes. Trail's blocked. I checked at dawn. Avalanche took out the main switchback. Even on foot, we'd need snowshoes, and I don't like the look of the cornices. Too risky, especially with the horses. Miriam sipped from a chipped mug. No help coming then, she murmured. She turned her attention back to Omen, checking his temperature and pulse. He's holding on. If the power stays out, we'll have to rely on wood and body heat. For a few quiet hours, the group settled into the uneasy rhythm of waiting out the storm. Clara fed Solace small sips of warm milk. Jonas scavenged the shed for more firewood and found 2 battered snowshoes, useless for the horses but possibly their only ticket out if things went bad. Miriam scribbled notes in her pad, eyeing Omen's wounds, muttering, "You stubborn old thing." Outside, the wind rose and fell in eerie, almost melodic waves. Then, just past noon, Omen jerked upright from his doze, nostrils flaring, ears pinned. The stallion's eyes fixed on the cabin door, body rigid and trembling. Solace startled, scrambling to his feet and pressed against Clara, who put her hand on his neck, heart pounding. Jonas was on his feet in an instant. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. He pulled a flashlight from his belt and moved to the nearest window, careful to keep his body low. Miriam's eyes darted between the humans and the horses, her hand going instinctively to her medkit as if it might offer protection. A low creak, barely audible, came from the porch. Jonas drew his knife, face stone cold. He motioned for silence and signaled Clara to keep the horses back. She crouched next to Solace, whispering softly, "It's all right, little one. We're safe. Just stay here with me, okay?" But her own pulse hammered in her ears. Jonas wiped condensation from the glass and peered out. For a second he saw only his own reflection, then his breath caught. Tracks. In the churned snow, outside the cabin, clear as day, were hoofprints, large, deep, circling the porch, then coming right up to the door. His military mind instantly cataloged the oddness. The tracks led in, but there were no tracks leading away. He pulled the door open a crack, flashlight beam trembling with the wind. The prints were fresh, too fresh. The snow hadn't yet filled them. Jonas knelt and brushed the top layer away. They weren't from Solace or Omen. The spacing was different, the depth all wrong. Something else had come calling in the night. He closed the door, voice low, and clipped. "We're not alone out here. Something, or someone, was watching us." Came close enough to touch the door, but it never left. Clara hugged Solace tighter, eyes wide. Miriam fidgeted with her glasses, voice thin. "There's nothing out there, right? I mean, what would survive in this storm?" Jonas shook his head. "I don't know, but the stallion knows. He's scared, and horses don't spook easy, not after what he's been through." He moved from window to window, checking the edges of the clearing, then paused at the back. He froze. A shape, just for a second, a pale, flickering blur at the tree line, almost human, almost animal, then gone. Jonas turned back, jaw set. "We keep the doors locked. No one goes outside alone. Not for a second. Whatever's out there, it's watching." As dusk fell, the sense of isolation deepened. With every gust of wind, Clara imagined footsteps just beyond the wall, eyes peering in, secrets pressing close. She sat beside Solace, running her hands along his neck, letting him rest his head in her lap. He snuffled and sighed, comforted by her touch. Omen remained alert, head always turned toward the door. Night deepened, and with it, the tension. The fire hissed and popped, casting restless shadows. Jonas sat by the window, knife drawn, every muscle tight. Miriam organized her supplies, placing syringes and bandages within arm's reach, as if medicine could fight monsters. Outside, the wind brought new sounds, clicks, thumps. The whinny of a horse echoing far too close for comfort. At one point, Clara thought she saw movement, a shape darting between the trees. She nearly called out, but bit her tongue, unwilling to let panic feed the growing sense of dread. Jonas rose, checked the windows again, and whispered, "We're not going to sleep much tonight." Clara nodded, her voice trembling but resolute. "We protect them, no matter what." And so they waited, 4 souls huddled in the eye of the storm, watched by something unseen, something patient. Inside the tiny cabin, trust tightened between them. Clara and Solace, Miriam and Omen, Jonas in his silent, ever-watchful vigil. The blizzard howled, but it was not the worst thing out there. As midnight approached, Omen finally lay his head down, Solace curled close. Clara rested against the wall, eyes never leaving the door. For a brief, breathless moment, she felt the ancient weight of the mountains pressing in, the deep, old wildness that remembered what it was to be hunted and lost. In the dark, as the snow piled higher and the world shrank to firelight and shadows, Clara whispered, not just to the foal, but to herself, to the whole trembling, hopeful alliance, "We hold together. That's how we make it through." And in that moment, as if in answer, a distant whinny rose again on the wind, familiar, desperate, and not quite alone. The wind finally began to die with the pale break of day, leaving the cabin swaddled in uneasy silence. The storm's rage had faded, but what remained outside was a wilderness transformed, an unbroken, glimmering sheet of snow, hiding all signs of the drama that had taken place through the long, haunted night. Inside, Clara stretched awake on the floor beside Solace, the foal snoring softly, warm at last. She pressed her hand to his side, grateful for his steady breath. Omen stood by the window, posture still tense, head raised as if he expected another intrusion. Jonas had kept watch the rest of the night, his eyes red-rimmed, every muscle coiled. Miriam, moving stiffly after a short, restless sleep, checked the animals, and then the perimeter, careful to avoid stepping where the tracks had circled the night before. Jonas went out first, bundled in a heavy parka, boots crunching through the new snow. Clara followed, Solace trailing at her side, curiosity overtaking fear. The air was sharp, clean, but heavy with the memory of what they'd all sensed, a presence that had come and gone in the darkness. Jonas knelt at the place by the porch where the hoofprints remained, now softened by a thin dusting of fresh powder. He studied them, frowning. "These aren't from Omen or Solace," he said quietly. "Different size. Deeper. Whoever it was, they were heavier too. Maybe armored. The stride's all wrong for a wild horse." He swept his hand along the track, following it as it curved around the cabin. But just beyond the edge of the clearing, the trail stopped abruptly. No exit. Like they vanished. Clara felt a chill. Superstitious, maybe, but real enough. "Nothing just vanishes in snow this deep, not unless it was never really here," she murmured. Jonas shook his head. "Or unless it's been trained to move differently. Special projects have ways of hiding tracks. Old army trick. This horse was sent, or escaped. Either way, it's not alone." They circled back to the cabin, where Miriam had been flipping through her battered notebook, cross-referencing the burned brand on Omen's side. "Project Equinox," she said softly. "I worked with some of their files years ago. Horses bred and conditioned for endurance, cold resistance, even stealth. Most of it was shut down after public backlash, but the most valuable animals were supposedly relocated, not destroyed. And now we've got one, maybe two, on our doorstep." Clara's gaze hardened. "You said the foal wasn't in the records." "What does that mean?" Miriam glanced up, brow furrowed. "Omen was engineered for survival. The foal, if he's not registered, then he was born after the escape, which means he's proof the program failed, because he wasn't supposed to exist at all." Jonas whistled low. "No wonder someone's coming after them." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden discovery. Clara, searching the side of the cabin for a shovel, uncovered a patch of ice clinging to a fallen signpost. Scraping at it, she revealed faded words. "Restricted U.S. government property." Beneath that, a rusted map box clung to the post. Inside, she found a laminated ranger map, brittle with age. Her heart thudded as she scanned the faded lines. "There's an area marked here. Off-limits, fenced. Last updated 2009, she said, voice tight. "It's less than a mile from here." Jonas's eyes lit with old instincts. Investigator, soldier. "Let's check it. If Omen came from there, there might be answers." Miriam stayed behind to watch the horses, tension obvious in her set jaw. Clara and Jonas set out, snowshoes crunching. The sun was a weak ghost behind gray clouds, but in its light, the wilderness seemed less threatening and more sad, hiding secrets just beneath the frozen surface. The walk was slow, every step a struggle, each footfall sending up tiny flurries. At last they came to the edge of a collapsed fence, old barbed wire half buried in ice. Beyond, a field of metal debris poked from the snow, fallen antennae, rusted gates, collapsed sheds. the skeletal remains of what had once been a high-security facility, now abandoned to wind and time. "Looks like they tried to bury the place," Jonas muttered, stepping over tangled wire, "but not well enough." They picked their way through the wreckage. In a corner of a ruined barn, Clara's boot struck something half-buried. Digging, she uncovered a warped metal file cabinet. Jonas forced it open, coughing as a cloud of must and dust billowed out. Inside were yellowed folders, medical records, and, unexpectedly, a photograph. It showed a younger Omen, flanked by two humans in lab coats. One was holding a halter, the other writing notes. The stallion was unmistakable even then, proud and powerful, but his eyes had the same haunted look. Clara studied the image. "He's always been alone," she said quietly. Jonas thumbed through more records, pausing at an entry marked, Unit 7, terminated. The notes listed extreme weather endurance, behavioral conditioning, and, chillingly, lethal retrieval authorized. But there was no mention of a foal, no record of offspring. Outside, the wind picked up, sending snow whirling through the broken roof. Clara wandered to a shattered gate, where Solace nudged the twisted metal with his nose, shivering. The foal looked up at her, his eyes wide with questions. Clara bent, hugging him close. Jonas joined her, voice soft. This wasn't just a project, it was a prison. Omen escaped, and the foal is the first free generation. Back at the cabin, Miriam greeted them with anxious relief. She listened as they relayed what they'd found, the map, the records, the photograph. She studied the picture for a long moment, her hand trembling. "I remember him," she whispered. "He was always different. Harder to break. More protective. They tried everything to train the fight out of him." She looked at Solace, who was dozing by the fire. "But the foal, he's what comes after. He's the hope they never planned for." That night, as the fire crackled and snow pressed close, Clara sat with Solace in her lap, Omen resting at her feet. The secrets they'd unearthed weighed heavy, but there was a strange sense of peace, a new understanding. They were not just survivors. They were witnesses to something rare, the breaking of chains, the birth of freedom. Jonas added more wood to the fire, then settled near the window, eyes on the night. Miriam scribbled quietly, preparing her own records, her own proof. Outside, in the deepening cold, the old facility lay silent. Its fences broken at last, its ghosts released. Inside, 4 souls, human and horse, watched, waited, and wondered what would come next. The cabin air had turned heavy with secrets. They had barely finished their meager breakfast when the tension began to thicken, settling over the little group like a storm cloud that refused to move on. The blizzard outside had finally relented, leaving behind a world buried in silence and dazzling white. But inside, the feeling that they were being hunted had only grown. Clara sat on the edge of the bunk, combing her fingers through Solace's mane, lost in the rhythm. Each pass calmed her, tethering her to the present. She had spent most of the morning wrestling with the image of that ruined facility, the Unit 7 terminated sign, and the way Solace had pressed his nose to the broken gate, as if trying to understand where he had come from. Now, every creak and sigh of the logs made her jump. Omen stood by the door, his powerful frame blocking out a patch of sunlight that spilled through the cracks. He hadn't slept. Clara could see it in the tautness of his muscles and the fire in his eyes. He'd spent the night watching the door and listening for what the others could not hear. Jonas, ever vigilant, checked and rechecked the windows, his knife never far from his belt. The snow had begun to settle, but the world beyond the cabin was still wild and unpredictable. He studied the hoof prints, now nearly gone, as if hoping they would reveal their secrets. Miriam was hunched at the table, scribbling notes, mapping timelines, searching her memories for clues that could explain who or what was hunting them. Every so often, she would pause, stare at the tag from Omen's halter, "Do not separate," and bite her lip, fighting the urge to call someone for help. But there was no one left to trust. It was just past noon when the silence shattered. Clara was about to pour more milk for Solace when the old radio, long silent, good as dead, suddenly sputtered to life. At first, it was nothing but a burst of static, a noise that made everyone freeze. Omen's head jerked up. Solace pressed himself closer to Clara's knees. Miriam dropped her pencil, and Jonas's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his knife. A voice crackled through the speaker, warped by static, but unmistakably human, calm, cold, and full of command. "Return the assets, we know where you are." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. For a split second no one breathed. Then Omen panicked, slamming his hooves against the floorboards, nostrils flaring, eyes rolling white with terror. Solace bolted, rushing to his father's side, pressing himself against the stallion's flank. Jonas leaped for the radio, but Miriam was faster. Her hands trembled as she pressed the button. "Who is this? Identify yourself." The reply was almost a whisper, tinged with a cruel amusement that made the hair on Clara's neck stand up. "Dr. Grant, it's been a long time. I suggest you do what you're told. You have 1 hour." The radio went dead. Silence crashed back, heavier than before. Clara stared at Miriam. "Who was that?" Her voice was barely more than a whisper. Miriam's face had gone pale, eyes wide with shock and an old familiar dread. "Colonel Stephen Rourke, my ex-superior at Equinox. He ran the retrieval teams, the worst of the worst. If he's here, if he's still running things." She broke off, hands clenched tight. Jonas's face darkened, but his voice was steady. "We're not giving them up." He looked at Clara, and then at Omen and Solace. "Not now. Not ever." Miriam's voice shook, but her words were steel. "He'll have to go through me first?" Clara stood, suddenly realizing her own hands were balled into fists. What does he mean, assets? He's talking about Omen and Solace. To them, that's all they are. Miriam nodded, her eyes wet but fierce. "He'll try to reclaim them, erase the evidence. Rourke doesn't care about survival, just control. That's how these projects always end. If he finds us—" She stopped, then looked at Jonas. "He'll send in a team, armed, trained, fast. And they won't care who gets hurt." For a moment, the whole group stood in silence, listening to the wind scrape against the logs, the sound suddenly threatening. Clara looked down at Solace, who trembled against Omen and felt a wave of old pain mix with new resolve. "Then we don't wait for them to come here," she said. "We move, tonight, if we have to." Jonas nodded, formulating a plan as he spoke. "There's a canyon east. Red Elk. Network of old rescue stations. If we keep to the tree line and move fast, we might beat them there. Omen can carry the foal if he needs to. We'll have to risk it." Clara glanced out the window, her nerves on fire. "How much time do we have?" Miriam checked her watch. "Less than an hour, if Rourke's telling the truth. Maybe less if he's bluffing." As they gathered supplies, water, rope, bandages, whatever food they had left, the atmosphere in the cabin changed. The fear was still there, but it was tempered now with determination, with something close to unity. Jonas packed his hunting rifle, checked the action, and handed Clara a flare gun. Miriam stuffed her notes and medical kit into her old rucksack. As they worked, Clara paused by Omen, who was still trembling, his eyes wild. She put her hand on his neck, whispering, "We're not going to let them take you. I promise." Omen's breath was fast and harsh, but as Solace pressed against him, something in his stance shifted. Protective, resolute, as if the two of them had found new strength in each other's presence. The final minutes before they left were a blur, bundling Solace in extra blankets, rigging a halter for Omen, checking the old snowshoes. Jonas scouted ahead, his face grim, every step careful. Miriam double-checked her supplies, jaw clenched tight. Clara locked the cabin door behind them, knowing it would never be a safe haven again. As they stepped out into the wilderness, every sense was alive. The world was cold and vast, the sun already slipping behind the clouds, shadows lengthening. But the group was united in a way they never had been before. No longer just survivors, but defenders. Behind them, in the darkening cabin, the radio sat silent, the last words echoing in the room. "Return the assets. We know where you are." Ahead, the only way was forward, toward freedom or fight, together. They moved as soon as dusk bled the last colors from the snow, slipping from the cabin's false safety into the winter wilderness. Jonas led the way, cutting a path through deep drifts, every sense tuned for signs of pursuit. His old military instincts, honed through years of shadow and danger, had returned with razor sharpness. Clara followed, Solace bundled in her arms as long as she could carry him, Omen trailing close, every muscle tight, the stallion's head swinging left and right, checking the wind. Miriam brought up the rear, her rucksack heavy with medical supplies and hope. Their destination was Red Elk Canyon, a place spoken of in whispers among local rangers, a web of old, mostly forgotten trails, off-grid animal rescuers, and winding valleys hidden from casual eyes. Jonas had learned about the canyon years ago from a weathered map and a conversation with a retired search and rescue pilot who'd described it as where you go when you need to disappear or help something else do the same. Tonight, it was the only hope they had. The land fought them for every inch. Snow weighted their boots, snagged their clothes, numbed their fingers. The wind had lost its teeth, but not its vigilance. Every sound felt amplified, every shadow a possible threat. More than once Omen stumbled, his great frame shuddering from exhaustion and old wounds, but Solace's tiny hooves pushed him onward, the foal's determination almost reckless. Hours blurred as they made their way through dense stands of aspen and twisted pine, always keeping to the low places, the wind-sculpted gullies, the old animal trails Jonas had marked in his mind. Once, Clara nearly fell into a hidden drift, the snow swallowing her to the waist. Jonas doubled back, hauling her out with gritted teeth, the only words between them a nod and a muttered, "Keep moving." The pressure to hurry was a physical thing, pressing at their backs, whispering that every delay gave Rourke's team more time to close in. Clara's arms ached, and more than once she staggered with the weight of Solace. But each time the foal whimpered, Omen would pause and nuzzle her, the stallion's presence both comfort and reminder. They weren't alone. After the third mile, they rigged a crude sling from rope and a cut-down sleeping bag so Omen could carry his son on his back. Solace protested at first, then curled into the warmth of his father's mane, his big eyes reflecting the uncertain moonlight. Night pressed in. Above them, the sky was a tapestry of frozen stars, breathtaking and cold. The forest creaked and whispered with ancient voices. In the silences between gusts, Jonas swore he heard hoofbeats echoing, not just Omen's heavy tread or Solace's nervous skittering, but other horses, ghostly and distant. He pressed forward, telling himself it was just the memory of the night before. They stopped only when absolutely necessary, eating handfuls of trail mix, sharing water from battered thermoses, keeping every break to a minimum. Miriam checked Omen's wounds by the light of a tiny headlamp, cleaning frostbitten patches and murmuring reassurances in a voice she barely recognized as her own. Clara tried to rest, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ruined laboratory, the Unit 7 terminated sign, and Rourke's voice echoing from the dead radio. Near midnight, as they crested a ridge overlooking a frozen creek, Omen's legs buckled. The stallion went down hard, steam bursting from his nostrils as he struggled to rise. Solace slid from his back, circling anxiously, nudging his father with his small, soft nose. Jonas moved quickly, checking for injury, but found only exhaustion and dehydration. "We need to stop," Miriam said. "He can't go another step without rest." Clara wrapped her arms around Solace, whispering, "He's not giving up, neither are we." She stroked Omen's cheek, feeling the old fear of failure, of losing someone she was supposed to protect, but forced herself to breathe. Omen's dark eyes met hers, full of trust and pain. Jonas and Miriam quickly fashioned a windbreak from fallen branches and snow, making a makeshift shelter. Jonas pressed a battered metal canteen to Omen's lips, coaxing him to drink, then set up a tiny camp stove to warm broth for both horses and humans. The night around them was alive with possibility and peril. Even as Omen rested, the feeling of being watched returned, so strong that Jonas kept his rifle across his lap, eyes never fully closing. As they huddled together, Clara found herself studying Solace, how the foal pressed against Omen's side, always watching for danger but never straying far from his father. The little horse seemed to understand more than he should, eyes wide with something like hope and fear all at once. A sudden noise, a sharp crack, like hooves on frozen bark, made everyone freeze. Jonas's hand went to his rifle. Miriam pressed her palm to Omen's shoulder. For a long moment, there was only the rush of blood in their ears and the steady breathing of the horses. Then silence. So deep it was as if the whole world was holding its breath. They waited. Nothing happened. Still, no one slept easily. The group moved before sunrise, unwilling to risk discovery. As they made their way deeper into Red Elk Canyon, the landscape shifted. Trees grew thicker, the ground dropped into tangled ravines, and signs of human presence became rare. A broken fence post, a rusted gate, and then, nailed to an ancient cottonwood, a weathered metal sign that stopped them cold. Jonas wiped frost from the sign and read aloud. Unit 7. Terminated. Lethal retrieval authorized. Clara shivered, even beneath her layers. They really meant to erase everything. Miriam scanned the area, wary. We have to keep moving. We're close, I think. I remember hearing about a sanctuary on the other side of the canyon. Horses, people off the grid. If we can get Omen and Solace there, maybe we'll have a fighting chance. They pressed on, each step a triumph over pain and fear. Every glance over their shoulders a reminder that Rourke's shadow still stretched behind them. But they moved forward because it was all they could do. In the hush before dawn, Clara paused to look at her companions. Jonas, exhausted but vigilant. Miriam, strong in ways Clara hadn't imagined. Omen, battered but proud. And Solace, the fragile hope at the center of it all. They were scarred, hunted, but together, bound not by blood or command, but by choice. Somewhere in the branches, a bird called, a high, wild note that sounded almost like a cry of freedom. Clara let herself believe, if only for a moment, that the worst might finally be behind them. But as the first pink glow touched the snow, she also knew the real fight was just beginning. The sky over Red Elk Canyon was slate gray, streaked with the first threat of another storm. As dawn clawed at the horizon, Clara, Jonas, Miriam, Omen, and Solace pressed forward, limping, battered, but moving. The landscape was different here. The trees grew in close ranks, their bare branches crossing above like the ribs of some ancient beast. The snow was pocked with drifts and old tracks, and every shadow looked like it might move. The sanctuary wasn't far now. Miriam, eyes hollow with exhaustion, pointed through the trees. We're close. The road runs along that ridge, just over those pines. Her voice barely rose above a whisper, hope and dread tangled together. Then, all at once, the hush was broken by the whine of tires crunching over frozen earth. At the canyon's mouth, an SUV appeared, black and hulking, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Jonas's hand shot up in warning. Clara pulled Solace close, her pulse racing. Omen snorted, muscles flexing beneath his matted coat. The SUV blocked the trail, its engine idling with predatory patience. The passenger door swung open and a man stepped out, a tall figure in a dark coat, boots planted wide, posture both casual and utterly controlled. Even from a distance, Clara recognized the kind of confidence that only came from commanding fear. The man's face was calm, eyes glinting with the sharp intelligence of someone who enjoyed being the spider in the web. Rourke. He gave a slow, measured smile as he regarded them, as if greeting old friends who'd failed a test. "You made good time," he called, voice carrying with a chill that no winter wind could match. Dr. Grant, Mr. Malik, Miss Evans, and our distinguished guests. His eyes lingered on Omen and Solace with proprietary hunger. Jonas moved forward, rifle across his chest. "Stay back. This is as close as you get." Rourke spread his hands, unarmed but dangerous. "I'm not here to make a scene, Jonas. I'm here for what's mine, the program's assets. Stand aside, and no one gets hurt." Miriam stepped up, anger burning through her exhaustion. "They're not assets. They're living beings. You don't get to erase your mistakes by calling it retrieval." Rourke's smile never wavered. "You know how this works, Doctor. There are protocols. The program failed, so it's time to clean up the evidence. Return the stallion, and the foal, and you can all go home." Omen's ears pinned flat. The stallion surged forward, placing himself between Rourke and Solace, muscles quivering, a low rumble in his chest. Solace pressed against his father's side, wide-eyed, but did not back down. Clara watched, heart aching. Omen was choosing, not just reacting, and his choice was clear. Jonas's finger hovered over the trigger. "We're not giving them up," he said quietly. "You'll have to go through all of us." Rourke's eyes flicked from Jonas to Miriam, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "This isn't about you, or them. It's about controlling what can't be allowed to run free." He took a step closer, voice dropping. "Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be." Miriam, breath trembling, pulled out her veterinary scanner and swept it over Solace's shoulder. The scanner beeped, and text appeared on the tiny screen. She held it up so Rourke could see. Unregistered. Unauthorized birth. Her eyes locked with his. "He doesn't belong to you. He never did." For a long, taut moment, no one moved. The only sound was the wind rattling in the trees, the heavy breaths of the horses, and the distant whir of the SUV's engine. Omen lowered his head, touching Solace's mane with a slow, deliberate gesture. Protection, comfort, promise. Clara felt tears sting her eyes, but her grip tightened on the flare gun Jonas had handed her. If it came to a signal for help, she'd fire without hesitation. Rourke's face hardened. "You're making a mistake. You can't stop what's coming. Programs like Equinox never really end. They just change names. Even if you run, there's nowhere to go." Clara stepped forward, raising her voice. "Maybe we can't stop you forever. But we can stop you today. You're not taking them. Not while any of us are breathing." Rourke stared her down, and for a moment his composure cracked. "You're wrong, Miss Evans. The world isn't changed by sentiment. It's changed by those willing to do what others can't." Jonas, gun steady, didn't flinch. "You want them? You'll have to step over us." For a tense eternity, no one moved. Omen stood his ground, every line of his body saying, "Not my son, not today." Solace lifted his head, leaning against his father, small but unbroken. A tense standoff. Then, a sudden roar behind them. From deeper in the sanctuary woods, voices rang out. Human, urgent, and angry. A group of sanctuary volunteers appeared, led by a woman with a battered walkie-talkie and a look of righteous fury. "Step away from the animals," she yelled. "You're trespassing on private property. Law's on the way. Cameras are rolling." Rourke hesitated, weighing his odds. Clara saw the calculation in his eyes. The risk, the witnesses, the inevitable fallout if he pushed too hard in daylight with phones pointed at him. For the first time, his confidence wavered. He glanced at the camera, then at Omen, and finally at Solace. The living proof the program had failed, and that something far greater than science had been born. Love. Choice. Defiance. He stepped back. "This isn't over," he promised, his voice low and cold. "You can't hide them forever. You can't hide yourselves." Then he nodded at Jonas, a soldier's farewell, and got back in the SUV. The vehicle spun in the slush, tires spraying mud and ice, then roared away up the trail, disappearing into the shadowed woods. The silence after was as heavy as thunder. Omen lowered his head, breathing deep and slow. Solace pressed his face into his father's neck, safe for now. Miriam dropped the scanner, tears streaking her cheeks, tears of relief and grief and victory. Clara sagged against Jonas, shaking with adrenaline and disbelief. She looked at the volunteers, at the battered, defiant little group that had stood together, and for the first time since the storm, she let herself believe they might actually have a chance. Jonas let out a long breath, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "Let's get them inside." As they led Omen and Solace toward the sanctuary barn, Clara glanced back down the empty road. The threat wasn't gone, not forever, but for today, the only thing that mattered was the choice they'd all made, to stand, to protect, to give two horses a life no one had ever planned for. In the end, Clara thought, sometimes love is the only thing that can turn survival into freedom. Windsong Refuge sat nestled deep in a protected valley, its pastures sprawling beneath wide Montana skies. For years, the sanctuary had served as a final haven for the broken, the retired, the unwanted. Now, as winter softened and sunlight reached the paddocks, Omen and Solace became its most extraordinary residents, symbols of defiance and quiet hope. The days after the confrontation with Rourke passed in a blur of exhaustion and healing. For the first time in weeks, Clara slept through the night. She woke to the sound of horses nickering in the distance, the warmth of morning sun on her face, and the gentle rhythm of sanctuary life, a rhythm that, she realized, had begun to change her from within. Clara's role at Windsong grew almost naturally. She found herself guiding new rangers, showing them how to read animal body language and how to listen, really listen, for distress. She taught not just, trail safety, but the softer skills she had learned the hard way: patience, emotional observation, intuition. Under her care, both horses and humans seemed to relax, to trust, to find their footing again. She realized she was no longer the haunted protector, but a mentor, her past wounds quietly reshaping into wisdom. Jonas, too, began to transform. The restless edge he'd brought from his years in the service was still there, but it softened in the presence of Solace, who followed him with innocent curiosity everywhere he went. Jonas built new shelters with his own hands, his movements growing unhurried. Sure. Sometimes, at dusk, he would sit in the pasture and talk softly to Omen, recounting memories he'd never told another soul. The stallion listened with calm, solemn eyes, as if he understood every word. Over time, Jonas's anxieties eased, the weight of war and old regrets replaced by the simple satisfaction of work, friendship, and purpose. Miriam threw herself into the future. Inspired by the ordeal, she launched the Equine Recovery Program, gathering volunteers, trainers, and vets to work with horses scarred by trauma. Omen became her cornerstone case, his progress meticulously documented. How he had learned to tolerate gentle touches, how his gaze had lost its haunted wildness, how, above all, he watched over Solace with a love that defied everything the program that made him had intended. Miriam wrote papers, sent reports, and, with the help of sanctuary staff, compiled a comprehensive file on Project Equinox's violations. When she finally submitted it to the state board and federal agencies, she included not just medical evidence, but videos, interviews, and living proof: Omen and Solace, together, unbroken. It was Solace who changed the fastest. In the first days, he clung to Omen's side, never venturing far, still haunted by memory and fear. But as the spring sun lingered and the air filled with the promise of grass and wildflowers, Solace discovered the gift of play. He ran wild circles in the open pasture, tail flying, sometimes so fast even Omen had to struggle to keep up. He nipped at the older horses, splashed in the creek, and returned, every time, to nuzzle Omen's neck, a wordless assurance that they belonged together, that they were safe. One afternoon, as Clara watched from the fence, Solace galloped wide across the field, whinnying with such wild joy that other horses lifted their heads in surprise. Omen followed, slow but determined, his limp almost invisible now, every stride radiating pride. When Solace finally returned and pressed his head into Omen's chest, Clara felt the lesson down to her bones. Trust, once given, could heal almost anything. Jonas joined her at the fence. For a while, they watched in silence. "He's different now," Jonas said softly, nodding toward Omen. "Not just stronger. It's like he's present, like he's not looking for a way out anymore." Clara smiled. "That's what freedom does. He's not surviving. He's living." That evening, Miriam hosted the first meeting of her new program. Rangers, volunteers, and even a few state officials gathered in the barn, all listening as she spoke about trauma, about recovery, and about the lessons Omen and Solace had taught them all. She ended with a simple message: "We can't erase what's been done, but we can choose what comes next." The following week brought news Clara had once thought impossible: an official inquiry. Journalists started calling, animal welfare groups rallied, footage of Omen and Solace at play, a stallion marked for suffering and a foal born against the rules, spread across social media. The world was watching, not just the darkness of what had happened, but the proof that healing and hope could follow even the cruelest secrets. For Clara, the shift was subtle but seismic. She no longer moved through life waiting for disaster, for betrayal, for the world to turn cold. She was still vigilant, still careful, but now she saw possibility as well as risk. She trusted herself, her friends, and the future she was helping to shape. On the first true night of spring, Clara stood in the paddock, watching as Solace pressed his nose to Omen's side, both horses relaxed and drowsy under the vast starlit sky. She reached out, and for the first time Omen let her touch his face. Just once, a brief, shuddering moment of permission. It was enough. It was everything. Nearby, Jonas rested on the fence. Miriam took notes in the dim light, and the sanctuary buzzed with quiet, hopeful energy. Windsong was full of stories, old and new, but the story of Omen and Solace had changed them all. As Clara turned toward the barn, she heard the distant call of coyotes. Wild, fierce, and free. She smiled, knowing that somewhere, out beyond the sanctuary, the world was still full of danger and loss. But here, at least, healing was real. Here, hope was a living, breathing thing. And as Omen and Solace settled together under the cottonwood tree, Clara understood what true sanctuary meant. Not the absence of scars, but the freedom to grow beyond them. The night air at Windsong Refuge was as gentle as a lullaby, carrying with it the scent of sweet hay and distant pines. The long ordeal, the storm, the flight, the confrontation, had passed, leaving behind a peace that felt almost unreal. Clara sat on a wooden bench outside the sanctuary barn, her boots muddy, her parka open to the cool, starlit breeze. Every muscle ached, but for the first time in years, her spirit was quiet. Across the paddock, Omen and Solace stood under a massive cottonwood tree, their shadows merging in the silver light. The black stallion grazed with slow, deliberate movements, no longer wary, only watchful. Solace, smaller but already sure-footed, trotted a quick, playful circle around his father, then stilled, pressing his head into Omen's broad chest. For a long moment they stood in silent communion, two survivors, one bred for resilience, the other born for freedom. Clara felt her breath catch at the sight. It was a moment she knew she would carry forever, burned into the quiet parts of her memory. A mug of steaming tea pressed into her hand drew her back to the present. Miriam joined her on the bench, exhaustion softening the sharp lines of her face. Together, they watched the horses, letting silence do the talking. Clara sipped, then set her mug down and spoke, not to Miriam, but to the night itself. "They thought they erased you," she murmured, voice catching with awe and a little bit of sadness. "But look at you now. You're not their weapon anymore. You're someone's peace." Miriam's eyes glistened as she smiled. "They trained him to survive hell," she said, her tone gentle and proud. "But no one taught him what to do with love." She glanced at Clara, a new understanding between them. "That's what made him dangerous to them and powerful for us." Above, 1,000 stars glittered, cool and bright. Somewhere a horse whickered softly, and the wind shifted, warm and full of promise. For the first time in as long as she could remember, Clara allowed herself to simply be, a witness to a miracle no one else could claim. Inside the barn, Jonas built new stalls with reclaimed wood, humming under his breath, letting Solace tug at his jacket sleeve. His hands were steadier now. The lines of worry on his face had softened. He talked quietly to Omen as he worked, describing what he was building, what the world could be, if given a little patience and trust. For Jonas, the journey had reshaped something broken inside him. Here, surrounded by animals and honest work, he let go of old ghosts, finding a kind of healing he hadn't known was possible. Solace would watch him, curiosity glowing in the foal's big eyes, and sometimes Omen would nudge Jonas's shoulder, as if giving silent thanks. Miriam moved between the horses in her new office, documenting every detail of Omen's transformation. How the stallion, once wild with trauma, had learned to accept gentle touches, and how Solace, born free, showed a resilience and brightness that seemed to infect everyone around him. Her equine recovery program was growing, attracting attention from sanctuaries and vets around the state. But the most important lesson was never in her notes. It was here, in the quiet grace of two horses learning to trust. Clara's own life shifted in the aftermath. She found herself becoming a mentor, teaching new rangers not just about trail safety or weather patterns, but about intuition, listening for what wasn't said, watching for pain that wasn't obvious. She taught them to look for stories beneath scars, and how to meet fear with gentleness, not just force. One night, as the wind carried warmth and peace through the sanctuary, the group gathered outside the barn. Omen and Solace dozed under the stars, the older horse's neck draped protectively over the foal. Jonas leaned against the fence, Miriam sat cross-legged in the grass, and Clara spoke softly, her words almost carried away by the night. They tried to control him, tried to erase everything that made him different, everything that made him special. But what saved Omen wasn't strength or training, it was his choice. He chose connection over conditioning. He chose to protect his foal instead of himself. And in the end, he let us in, even when every instinct told him to run. Miriam nodded, her voice a gentle echo. Real healing doesn't erase the past. It builds something stronger on top of it. For a while, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft, contented snuffling of Solace, the steady breath of Omen, and the wind in the cottonwoods. A shooting star arced across the sky, brief and brilliant, before fading into memory. Clara looked at her friends, her found family, and found herself smiling. We did something right. For them. For us. That week, Miriam submitted a formal case file to the State Veterinary Board and several federal agencies, including documentation proving that Equinox Project had violated ethical protocols. Omen and Solace became living evidence, proof not just of what had been done wrong, but of what could be made right. News spread. There was public outrage, calls for accountability, and for the first time, it seemed possible that no more horses would be lost to secrets and silence. Still, not every fight could be won in courts and headlines. Clara knew there would always be people like Rourke, those who saw value only in what could be measured or controlled. But tonight, she saw something bigger, a sanctuary full of life, defiance, and hope. She stood, gazing at Omen and Solace resting beneath the stars. The foal shifted, pressing closer to his father's side, and Omen wrapped his neck protectively over Solace's back. For all their scars, they were home. Clara felt a call deep inside her, a responsibility to share what she'd learned. She turned to the camera set up by the sanctuary volunteers, recording a message for those who would listen. If Omen's journey touched your heart, share it. Speak out for animals used and discarded. Support sanctuaries, vote for accountability, listen to the silent ones. And remember, sometimes the most powerful courage isn't to fight, but to trust again. As she spoke, a hush fell across the paddock, as if every soul, animal and human, was listening. She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. The world, Clara knew, was often cruel and full of noise. But sometimes, if you listened hard enough, you could still hear the softer truth, that love, trust, and second chances were worth more than any victory won by force. And under a sky full of stars, with hope sleeping at her feet, Clara believed it was enough.